Hi, good afternoon and welcome to the noon briefing. A short while ago, the Secretary General and President Yoweri Museveni closed the Uganda Solidarity Summit on Refugees in Kampala. Pledges of more than $350 million were made towards Uganda's efforts to support more than 1.2 million refugees hosted, for the most part, in local communities. In remarks to the press, the Secretary General congratulated the Ugandan government for the conference. What has been pledged is a good start, he said, but we cannot stop. In the opening session, the Secretary General praised Uganda's government and people for the way they had opened the country's borders and their homes to refugees. It is necessary, he said, to recognize that Uganda remains a symbol of the integrity of the refugee protection regime that unfortunately is not respected everywhere in the world. Not all doors are open, he said, not all refugees are accepted, and sometimes in countries much richer than Uganda. The Secretary General recalled with emotion how 12 years ago in northern Uganda, he had celebrated with South Sudanese who were about to return home full of hope. Now he was back, and South Sudanese had been forced to flee their homes again. The conclusion is obvious, he said. Everything must be done to end the war in South Sudan. In answering a question at the press conference, the Secretary General said that the UN was committed to protecting civilians in its protection of civilian sites for as long as it takes. As the Secretary General himself told you earlier this week, he will travel to Washington, D.C., and this will be next Tuesday, the 27th of June. The trip will be part of his ongoing outreach to Washington and other capitals. He is expected to meet with both Democratic and Republican leaders, members of the Foreign Affairs and Relations Committees, as well as the Appropriations Committees of both the House and the Senate. The Secretary General will also be meeting with senior members of the President's Cabinet. And you will have seen the statement we issued yesterday evening in which the Secretary General welcomed the adoption of Resolution 2359 as a first step in support of the decision by the Group of Five for the Sahel to set up a joint force to combat terrorism and transnational organized crime in coordination with national and other forces. The Secretary General reiterated the commitment of the UN, working closely with the African Union and other partners, to do its utmost to help mobilize adequate resources for the attainment of the objectives of the force as agreed by the leaders of the G5 and endorsed by the AU Peace and Security Council. The Secretary General also noted that the adoption of the resolution coincides with the second anniversary of the 2015 Agreement on Peace and Reconciliation in Mali. While welcoming the important progress made by the signatory parties, he underscored the need for expeditious progress on the remaining aspects of the agreement with a view to consolidating and sustaining peace in Mali and the region. And the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein, welcomed today the creation of an international investigation into allegations of gross violations and abuses in the KASAIS region of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He said it sends a strong message to the perpetrators that the international community is serious about bringing them to justice. Since 2016, some 1.3 million people in the KASAIS have been internally displaced by the violence, while some 30,000 refugees have fled to Angola. The High Commissioner said he expected and counted on the full cooperation of the authorities, particularly in providing unfettered access to all sites, files, people, and places. UNICEF warned today that the announcement of an end to famine conditions in South Sudan this week should not distract from the fact that severe food insecurity continues to put the lives of millions of children at risk in northeast Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, and Yemen. Manuel Fontaine, UNICEF's Director for Emergency Programs, said that there is no room for complacency and that while famine has been reversed in South Sudan, the crisis is far from over. He stressed that the need to continue to scale up our response and insist on unconditional humanitarian access. Otherwise, the progress made could be rapidly undone. And our colleagues at UNICEF warned today that more than 5.6 million children are at increased risk of contracting waterborne diseases, such as cholera and diarrheal infections, as the rainy season begins in conflict-affected areas of countries around Lake Chad. The threat of disease outbreaks in Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria coincides with growing regional insecurity and increased population movements, particularly in Nigeria's northeast, while flooding and muddy roads are expected to severely limit humanitarian access to remote areas for several weeks. Across the Lake Chad region, UNICEF and its partners are working in communities at higher risk of cholera outbreaks to teach families about the effects of the disease and practical steps to avoid infection. In Niger, Cameroon, and Chad, essential drugs and bars of soap have been pre-positioned in warehouses close to IDP camps in case of a cholera outbreak. The water, sanitation, and hygiene response in the Lake Chad Basin has received less than 20% of the $80 million required to meet urgent needs in 2017. Despite the lack of funding, this year UNICEF aims to provide 2.7 million people with the basic supply of water needed to survive. And the UN mission in the Central African Republic reports that the situation in Bria in Haute-Koto remains tense after clashes earlier in the week between the FPRC and the anti-Balaka. International humanitarian workers began the process of recovering bodies from the streets. The mission reports its inability to access areas controlled by the FPRC, where most of the clashes occurred. Meanwhile, the mission has transferred 29 civilians, mainly women and children, who fled Tuesday's fighting to an internally displaced persons site in Bria. The UN mission has also reinforced its presence in the town by temporarily redeploying 70 police officers from a Bangui-based formed police unit. Elsewhere, in Bambari, UN police yesterday arrested 6 members of the UPC and handed them over to the local gendarmerie as part of the mission's efforts to protect civilians and end the presence of armed groups in the town. The UN Human Rights Office says that it continues to document reports of civilian casualties as a result of the conflict in Yemen, having verified 49 civilian deaths in the past month. The office reiterated that indiscriminate or disproportionate attacks or attacks targeting civilian objects such as markets are prohibited under international humanitarian law. It also reminded all parties to the conflict of their obligation to ensure full respect for international human rights law and international humanitarian law, and said that all incidents resulting in civilian casualties must be thoroughly investigated to ensure accountability when breaches of international law have been found to have taken place. Since March 2015, the office has recorded a total of 13,504 civilian casualties, including 4,971 killed and 8,533 injured. And you can read more about this on the Human Rights Office's website. And on Iraq, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that with the offensive on the old city of Mosul ongoing, civilians continue to flee the area, though at a slower rate than in previous weeks. The slowdown is thought to be the result of people choosing to remain in the relatively protected environment rather than attempting the hazardous exit from the old city. Daesh fighters are also known to be actively preventing civilians from leaving. Conditions inside Daesh-held parts of Mosul are increasingly desperate. A sack of wheat is now selling for $675. Gasoline is reportedly selling for more than $6 per liter, and malnutrition rates among children arriving from West Mosul are rising. As of yesterday, and since the Mosul operation began last October, more than 880,000 people have been displaced from Mosul. Of these, more than 686,000 remain displaced, while nearly 200,000 people have reportedly returned home. And on Syria, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that between yesterday evening and the early hours of today, a UN Red Cross Syrian Arab Red Crescent interagency humanitarian convoy delivered food and other items for nearly 110,000 people in the Ar-Rastan area of rural homes. Solar lamps and some supplies were removed upon loading, and the delivery also faced insecurity in neighboring towns while items were being unloaded. The last interagency convoy to the area was on the 30th of March. The UN continues to call for safe, unimpeded, and sustained access to all people in need across the country, particularly the more than 4.5 million men, women, and children in hard-to-reach and besieged areas. And today is International Widows' Day, which seeks to shine a light on the struggle that many women face around the world after the loss of a husband. According to UN Women, there are more than 285 million widows around the world, with over 150 million of them living in deep poverty. And today is also Public Service Day, which celebrates the value and virtue of public service to the community, recognizes the work of public servants, and encourages young people to pursue careers in the public sector. And earlier this morning in New York, the UN and Uganda signed the first Memorandum of Understanding on support provided to the African Union mission in Somalia. This Memorandum of Understanding will also be signed by the African Union. This aims to strengthen and formalize the provision of support provided to AMISOM. It covers the provision of support to the military contingent and a foreign police unit that Uganda is contributing to AMISOM. Speaking at the signing ceremony, the Undersecretary General for Field Support, Atul Kare, thanked the government of Uganda for its contribution to AMISOM and expressed his deep appreciation for the sacrifices made by all troop and police contributors in Somalia. Mr. Kari noted that today's agreement will strengthen the AU-UN partnership framework that the Secretary General signed in New York in April. This was the first of the 6 memorandums of understanding that will be signed by the UN and the AU with troop and police contributors, namely Burundi, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Nigeria. And lastly, I promise, our colleagues from OCHA today released a study which advocates that internally displaced people should not have to wait until a conflict is fully resolved or all impacts of a disaster are over before they can begin rebuilding their lives. The study says that governments bear the primary responsibility for addressing internal displacement and should, with the international community, regard protracted internal displacement as primarily a development and political challenge, which may also require a continued humanitarian response. And you can read more about this on OCHA's website. And I promise I am done with my part. Michelle.
Thank you, Eri. Just to follow up on the announcement of the SG's trip to Washington. Obviously, it comes amid discussions down there on the US budget and funding for the UN. What's the message that he's going to be taking to the lawmakers in D.C.?
As he told you on Tuesday, he will be meeting with members of Congress, and as he said that, the proposal that was presented to the Congress would, he said, quote, create an unsolvable problem. So I think these and other matters of mutual concern are issues that he will be bringing to the leaders when he meets with them. As he told you, in this trip, he's meeting members of Congress, and so he has no other plans, but if that changes, we will let you know for sure. Yes.
Thank you. Earlier today, Colombian President Santos said in Paris that the UN has received 100% of the arms stock by the FARC guerrillas. So I wonder if there is any comment on that. Can you confirm if in fact it has happened? Do you plan to do any announcement later today? What can you tell us on that?
Right now, at present, I don't know. We don't have any confirmation right now, but if we have anything, we'll get back to you on that. Thank you.
No confirmation?
Not right now.
Not right now.
Yeah. Rosalind.
A point of clarification and then my question. Is the Secretary General's trip to Washington just one day? Because there's some reports suggesting that it's a 3-day trip to Washington.
For now, we don't have an end date, but as soon as we know, we will let you know.
Okay, and then my main question. Overnight it was leaked the list of demands from Saudi Arabia and its allies on Qatar. In one sense, it's a question of curbing Qatar's sovereignty, cutting off diplomatic ties with certain countries, ending military relationships with other countries, and then there's the question of press freedom, specifically calling for the shutting down of the Al Jazeera media network, not just the Arabic channel. What is the Secretary General's view of this list of demands, especially given that there's a 10-day deadline, and if there's a specific comment about the efforts to shut down not just Al Jazeera, but a number of other media outlets based in Qatar? Thank you.
We continue to follow the situation with deep concern. We are aware of reports of a list of demands on Qatar, but we are not able to comment in detail on or confirm such a list. We hope that the countries involved resolve the situation through dialogue. We are ready to assist if requested by the parties, and any resolution or basis for discussion should be consistent with international law, including human rights and international humanitarian law, as well as the UN Charter, as all countries concerned are UN member states.
And a quick follow-up. The fact that there is a 10-day deadline, does that raise particular concern? Does that sound like some sort of ultimatum that perhaps one nation state should not be making to another?
As the Secretary General told you earlier this week, he really hopes that this is a situation that is resolved through dialogue and through diplomatic channels. So on our end, you've heard our concerns, and we'll see what happens. Yes, in the blue dress.
Yesterday, the Israeli ambassador to the UN sent a letter to the Secretary General that Hezbollah is violating the UN-backed ceasefire by building up observation posts under the guise of an environmental group. Is the UN looking into this? Is UNIFIL looking into this?
We've checked with our UNIFIL colleagues, and they say that they have, as if we seen the media reports alleging violation of Resolution 1701 in the context of the activities of the NGO that you mentioned near the blue line. Our UNIFIL colleagues say that this NGO has been active in the area for the last 2 years, and UNIFIL, in cooperation with the Lebanese Armed Forces, closely monitors all activities close to the Blue Line. And in accordance with its mandate, UNIFIL cannot and does not enter private property unless there is credible evidence of a violation of Resolution 1701 or an imminent threat of physical violence emanating from that specific location. Over the last 2 years, UNIFIL has observed tree planting activities undertaken by the NGO, as is their stated objective. UNIFIL has not observed any unauthorized armed persons at the location or found any basis to report a violation of the resolution. UNIFIL constantly urges the parties to exercise caution in undertaking any activity in the vicinity, and UNIFIL remains in regular contact with the Lebanese Armed Forces Command in relation to this and other activities close to the Blue Line to ensure that there are no violations of Resolution 1701 and to avoid any misunderstandings or tensions that could endanger the cessation of hostilities. And for its part, UNIFIL remains vigilant and continues to closely monitor the Blue Line.
So just to be clear, they say they haven't seen any violations.
No.
No violations. Okay, thank you.
Stefano.
Thank you very much. Again, on the situation in Libya with refugees. The new appointments of Ghassan Salameh on the United Nations Support Mission in Libya. We know that, of course, there is a lot of hope that this will push the political crisis there. But also talking to the Italians about the concern that there is with the situation with refugees, migrants, and the way they feel that the agreements that they're doing with the government recognized by the UN on how to keep those migrants there, they think that is legitimate. At the same time, they wish, they hope, they use these words, that the UN will do more on the social aspect of their mission. Means not only political advance, but also to help Libya to be able to take care of those in need. So my question is, Salameh, does have special instruction from the Secretary General on making sure the UN will do more in providing for the refugees and migrants that are stuck in this moment in Libya in very, very terrible conditions?
So I'm sure Mr. Salameh has heard the concerns that you've raised. The issue of refugees and migrants is obviously of huge concern, both to the UN and, of course, I'm sure to Libya. Let's give him a few days to settle into his job. The concerns that you raised have been heard loud and clear, and so let's give him a few days to settle in and see when he begins his work officially and how he makes contacts with the Libyan government and other parties. Yes.
Secretary General tweeted a few days ago, the problem isn't refugees. The problem really is the wars that create refugees. Will he be raising those issues when he meets with Trump administration officials and members of Congress, etc., in terms of dealing with the wars that really create refugees? And in fact, I'm mentioning this because when we talk about Libya, the Libyan situation is a unique situation that where we had a stable North African Muslim country, secular Muslim country, and then the NATO nations went in there, created this confusion, and now we have refugees pouring out of Libya. Will the Secretary General be raising those types of issues with Trump administration officials in terms of mitigating these refugee problems?
As you know, the situation involving refugees and migrants is one that is close to the Secretary General's heart. He talked about this in depth on Tuesday. As I said earlier, he will be raising issues of some of the main issues on the UN's agenda, and I wouldn't doubt that the situation of refugees and migrants would be high on that list. As he told you, and as he said many times before, like you said, the situation involving refugees is largely a political one. While it's important to and critical really, that we raise money and to find humanitarian solutions for some of the most immediate pressing problems. Ultimately, that's not the solution. It's finding a political solution. He just said that in Uganda yesterday when he was talking about the close to 1 million South Sudanese refugees who have been there for a long time. He said, at this point, it's up to the leaders of South Sudan. They need to work on behalf of their people. Yes.
Me?
Yes.
Thank you. I have a few questions, and I will start with something that has nothing to do with politics. I went to DC2 building today to go to the credit union, and I was denied entry. And they said the rules of using the pass has changed. So as a resident correspondent, that means my ID does not allow me to enter DC1 or DC2. I thought that was an insult to the credibility of the body of journalists who've been working in this organization for many years. And especially as for me, I am a former UN staff for many years. So how can I be denied entry to meet an officer at the credit union?
This is the first we've heard of this, so we'll check with our security colleagues and see what we can do.
Okay. Now I go to political questions. I want to follow up with the question of Rosalind raised about the ultimatum. Giving a country, a sovereign country, 10 days ultimatum to execute unexecutable demands, it means like a threat of war. According to UN Charter, the SG is entitled, according to Article 99, to bring an issue that may develop into a threat to international peace and security to the attention of the Security Council. Would he be considering activating Article 99 to bring this issue? That is serious now. It's 4 countries threatening another sovereign nation, putting demands that is completely unrealistic, and giving them 10 days to execute them.
As we said, we've seen the reports of this list of demands, but we don't have the list and we can't confirm the existence of it. But either way, the situation has obviously reached a very serious stage. And as the Secretary General said earlier this week, he supports the idea of a regional dialogue led by Kuwait, but he also said that there are other options on the table, and I don't think that he would spare any efforts to make sure that there's a diplomatic solution to this. Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I apologize. I do not know your name and your position over here. Can you please introduce yourself?
We've emailed several times in the past.
Yes, we have seen each other, but
yes.
We've not been introduced.
My name is Ari Kaneko.
Oh, okay.
Ari, yes. Yeah.
In his press conference last Tuesday, the Secretary General said that he has had a couple of talks with Indian Prime Minister and some talks with 3 times he has talked to the Pakistani Prime Minister. But he did not elaborate as to what happened in the talks or whether any commitment was taken from the 2 leaders to continue their bilateral engagement. Because at this point in time, there are human rights abuses going on in Kashmir, which you and everybody else knows, but they do not talk to each other. So what did the Secretary General, do you have any understanding that the Secretary General was given any commitment?
No, I think what he was saying was that he has been engaged with these leaders. He's met them 5 times in total since he's become Secretary General. I think that's a sign of his commitment to the issue, his interest and his involvement in the issue. What the leaders agreed on is for them to say, them to announce. It's not for us to say. But the point that he was making and that we continue to make is that he is very engaged on the issue. And we'll let you know if there's anything.
Yeah, I do realize what you're saying is that the point that you were making, that he's engaged, that I understand. But did you get any feedback from the Secretary General himself that either the Indian or the Pakistani Prime Minister has given him any commitment to what you call continue to engage in dialogue, or they will continue to?
Again, any commitment from the leaders is a question for them. It's not something for us to announce.
No, but Secretary General was not given any assurances?
That's for them to announce. That's not for us to announce. Yes.
On the 20th of this month, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said while he inaugurating a new settlement, a new one, not expanding an existing one. He said, "It is an honor to build the illegal outpost in defiance of international law." That's what he said. After decades, I have the honor to be the first prime minister to build a settlement in Judea and Samaria. So he takes pride in defying international law. Is there any comment on that?
Our position on settlements is clear. We've long said that they're a contravention of international law, and we stand by that. Is there anything else? Okay. Thanks. Have a good weekend. Oh, and we're closed on Monday, so we'll see you back here on Tuesday. No.